Okay, everybody, good to see you all. Welcome, Chag HaAtzmaut Sameach. A wonderful time to come together to celebrate a miracle, literally in our days, that our parents would have, and our grandparents would have given probably both arms to have been able to see this miracle of Eretz Yisrael. So it's a very special day for us. I hope you'll all find a way to celebrate, even if it means having falafel for lunch. We are first and foremost gastronomic Jews. So if you find a way to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, that's great. Okay, so we are continuing on. Moshe Rabbeinu the page is probably have here. 888, 888. Yeah, I think 888 sounds good. Okay, page 888. Moshe Rabbeinu, as we learned last week, Moshe Rabbeinu has been told that despite giving over the laws of inheritance to the Jewish people, despite having dealt with Benos Slavchad, that he is not going to be going into the land. And the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu is commanded to go up to the top of Har HaAvarim, which is Har Nevo, as we know, as we learned last week, to go up to the top of the mountain, and there he'll see the land. Our pasuk picking up on that, and there you'll see the land. So our pasuk says as follows: V'ra'isa oso, pasuk 13, Yud Gimel. V'ra'isa oso v'ne'esafta alamecha. You will see it, and you will be gathered to your people. Gam ata ka'asher ne'esaf Aharon achicha. Right, just like your brother Aharon was gathered as well, so too will you be gathered to your people. Interesting that the phrase is not death. You're not going to die, but what does it say? You'll be gathered to your people. Why is that? Because Moshe and Aaron died Misa bin Neshika. Right? Whatever Misa bin Neshika means, it means literally death by kiss. Right? Misa bin Neshika, whatever that means, is the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself was responsible for the death of Moshe and Aaron, but not like the soul slips out in a painless kind. Again, what do I know? I don't really know. I'm just sharing with you what I've learned, that the soul comes out in a painless kind of way. You know, there's a whole machlokas in the Gemara. We're learning Gemara Moed Katan on Shabbos afternoon. A whole dispute about, is death painful or not painful? So it's interesting. It's interesting that the Gemara is debating it, because we know from our own experience, if I were to ask you, is death painful or not painful? What would you say? Depends what? Yeah, we've seen both. We've seen deaths that seem to be not at all painful. A person closes their eyes and that's it. We don't see any angst, we don't see any anguish, we don't see any suffering, right? Person just closes their eyes and that's it. And we often refer to such a death as a Misa bin Neshika, right? We refer to such a death as that way. Okay, on the other hand, we have seen people who have died terribly agonizing deaths. Right? We've all had those experiences. Right? So, so the answer to the Gemara's question is it depends. There are those, yes and no. Right? Is it painful to die? Maybe for some it is, and for others it isn't. The Gemara gives two examples, two metaphors to understand it. According to the opinion that says death is not painful, it's like pulling a hair out of a glass of milk. Right? In other words, you have a little hair in a glass of milk, you pull it out, it doesn't resist, it comes right out. It's not. That's how the removal of the neshama is from the goof. It just comes out very, very easily, very easily. And others say, no, it's a real battle. That the neshama and the goof don't really, the neshama doesn't want to leave the goof. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to pull the neshama out of the Malach HaMaves, has to pull the neshama out of the goof with a lot of force. So there are those who say that, right? That death is painful because there's a struggle going on. So the Gemara seems to resolve it in a fascinating way. The Gemara says, people who have led more spiritual kinds of lives, people who are more inclined to spirituality, people for whom Ruchnius is more important than Gashmius. The spiritual is more important than the physical. So for those people, what do we say? For those people, Misa is a spiritual thing. The neshama goes easily. But for people for whom the world is about celebrating the physical, for people who are very much into Gashmias over Ruchnias, so for those people, it becomes a much more challenging death. It's much more difficult for the neshama to leave that body because the neshama has gotten used to that. So that's perhaps an interesting way of understanding these two. But Misa bin Neshika, this kiss of death, which is what Aharon died from, and which Miriam died from, and which Moshe died from. It's not mentioned specifically by Miriam because it's pasnish, right? It's not sanua to talk about, Kadosh Baruch Hu kissing Miriam, so to speak. But here we have Misa bin Neshika, and that's why it says Kasher Nesaf Aharon Achicha, that you will be gathered just like Aharon will be gathered. So interestingly, we want to look at a couple of things in this pasuk. First of all, we want to look at this idea that the word Vira'isa is written in a little bit of an unusual way. Right? You're going to go up to the mountain, right? Go up to the top of the mountain, Moshe, Vira'isa, and see. If I were writing Vira'isa, it would not be written with a hey at the end of it. There's something a little bit unusual about having a hey written at the end of the word. So I want to share two fascinating insights with you. Not only into Hebrew language, but also into human nature. So listen, so this idea of Vira'isa, writes the Ksav v'Kabbalah, a little bit of a mystical commentary, writes the Ksav v'Kabbalah, B'chol HaTorah, in all of the Torah, Kol Vira'isa Chaser Hey. Whenever the word Vira'isa appears in the Torah, what's missing? The hey at the end. This is the only time where the hey appears at the end of the word Vira'isa. V'kan hey b'sof hateva, al pi ha'mesora. Right, this is it. So what's the explanation for it? Why is there a hey at the end of the word Vira'isa here? Ulada'ati says the Ksav Kabbalah. According to my understanding, Nachon hu ma'od haklal shebiyadenu. It's the rule that we have, the general principle that we have seems to me to be very clear and very appropriate here. Ki b'chol pa'am hana'aseh b'chefetz u'b'ratzon tischaber bo ha'hei. Right? That whenever you have to do something, whenever there's a verb connected to, whenever there's an action that's being demanded and a hey is attached to it, what do we see? We see that the action has to be done b'chefetz u'v'ratzon. What does it mean b'chefetz u'v'ratzon? Willingly, engagingly, b'simcha, with happiness. What? Sincerely, that's how it has to happen. Lachein b'ri'iyah zo shemisa Moshe tuluya ba. In this seeing of the land, to which Moshe's death is connected, because what's going to happen right after Moshe sees the land? He's going to die. Right after Moshe sees the land, he's going to die. So, umiteva ha'adam lihisatsev badavar hamekarev misaso. It's human nature that you're going to be saddened, frightened by something that is going to bring about your death. I think, it's, for most of us, dying is scary, right? Dying is scary. Hopefully we reach a point where it's not so scary at one point in our lives. And I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan is that, you're scared, and then you're not scared. I think it's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu's, perhaps that's the plan, although I've seen people who are terrified of dying, and I've seen people who are ready to die. Not at all scared, not at all sad. It's my time, I've had a good life, ready to go. But it's human nature, says the Ksav v'Kabbalah, it's human nature that when you know something is going to bring about your death, and there is something that you're going to miss out on, what is Moshe Rabbeinu going to miss out on? He's going to miss out on seeing the land. He's going to miss out on this goal that he has spent the last 40 years working towards. He's going to miss out on that. It's very easy for us to imagine that indeed Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be saddened. Right? Go up to the top of the mountain, Moshe, and look out, and then guess what? Then you're going to die. And Moshe Rabbeinu is like, there should be a certain sadness associated with that, a certain reluctance that's associated with that looking at the land. But, says the Kabbalah, the pasuk is written in such a way, the word V'ra'isa is written in such a way as to tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is commanding Moshe not just to go and look at the land, but to go and to look at the land b'simcha. Right? That yes, this is going to be the last thing that you do. You're not going to be able to go into the land. You intuitively would be sad to do this, and therefore I'm commanding you not to be sad. I'm commanding you to do this with simcha, with rejoicing. And the Ksav Kabbalah gives another example, a very interesting example. Uvedavar zeh yuvan lanu she'amar, that which we're going to see. It's not here. We haven't reached it yet, but we will come to reach it when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe that Aharon is going to take, that Yehoshua is going to take over. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? Vitzivisa, right? Oso le'einehem v'nasata mehotcha. Maybe we should jump up and look at the pasuk. Pasuk Yutes. Just a few lines up ahead at the bottom of the page. Right, we won't get to it today, but what does it say? Bottom of the page says, Pasuk Yotes, V'ha'amadata oso lifnei Elazar ha'kohen v'lifnei kol ha'ida. This is referring to Yehoshua, and you're going to have him stand before Elazar the Kohen, who had taken over from his father Aaron, v'lifnei kol ha'ida, in front of the congregation. V'tzivisa oso le'einehem. Vitzivisa, how does the word vitzivisa end? With a hey, unusual. The ha'amadata doesn't have a hey at the end of it, right? That doesn't have a hey in it. Vitzivisa has a hey at the end of it. V'nasata mehodecha alav, and you're going to put your glory, your hod, your splendor on him, on Yehoshua. So what is Moshe Rabbeinu being commanded to do here in just a few psukim? He's transitioning, he's transferring his leadership. Now, obviously, he's not going to do this until the end of his life. It's not happening right now. But here is the command. This is the command right now. And that's why Vinasata, right? V'tzivisa oso le'einehem. You're going to command Yehoshua to take over in front of all of the people. What intuitively, says the Kabbalah, what intuitively is Moshe going to feel at that moment when he is charging his successor? He's going to feel sad. He's going to feel a bit, I don't know. Life is, things are coming to an end. Right? I'm retiring. Right? My job is over. And there's somebody new who's going to take over, who's going to take this Jewish people into the future. That is a situation that probably would bring sadness to most people, right? But what happens with Kadosh Baruch Hu's command to Moshe? Don't be sad. Do it b'simcha. Do it b'simcha. Put him up there in front of all of the people, b'simcha. And give him of yourself, of your splendor. Give him the tools that he needs to lead the people. Do it b'simcha. Because this is part of your mission as well. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu's mission is to be able to go and to ensure that the Jewish people will continue. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is not living forever. So Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying, Moshe Rabbeinu, you want the people to continue, right? You want the people to be successful. It's not about you, it's about the Jewish people. So when you make this transition, when you hand over these leadership reins to Yehoshua, So you have to do it b'simcha. You have to do it b'simcha. Even if you might not feel, right? Even if you might not feel it, nevertheless, you have to work to do it b'simcha. That's the challenge that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving here to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what the Ksava Kabbalah says is the extra hay. Fascinating insight into human nature. Right? Rav Hirsch has a little bit of a different interpretation. What does Rav Hirsch say about the hay? Rav Hirsch says, V'ra'isa tosefes ha'os hay b'sof ha'teva, that the word hay is at the the word hay is at the end of the word, right? Why is there a letter hay at the end of the word? So says Rav Hirsch, Shere'iyah zo einot tzivui shemutal alav ba'ofen midi. This is not something that he has to do right now. In other words, we're not expecting the next psukim in Chumash to be talking about Moshe's death. We're only in Parshas Pinchas. We still have a whole of Parshas Devarim to go, right? A whole of Chumash Devarim to go. Before Moshe dies, Moshe doesn't die until the very end of Chumash. So says Rav Hirsch, this Vira'isa means when you add a hey to the end of a verb, it doesn't mean it's something that you need to do right now, but it's something that you will need to do. And therefore, that's the idea here. So they have a very interesting difference of opinion, the Ksava, the Kabbalah, and Rav Hirsch about the extra hay. But nevertheless, you see that there's something special about this hay here. I thought that the Ksava Kabbalah was a very powerful kind of statement. Okay, so question. Go ahead.
It seems to me that it's in the past tense.
So it is in modern day Hebrew. It is considered clearly lashon avar. If I say ra'isi means I saw something. Doesn't mean I'm going to see something. It means I saw something. But in biblical Hebrew, we often get what's called the past future. In other words, the vav changes it into something into this is something that you will do. There's a technical name for it, which vav ha-mehapechet maybe, right. There is a name to it. The vav ha-mehapechet, right, changes from past to the future, right. So it's and you will, right. You will go up and you will see. Okay, so that's what we have here. Very interesting idea that's here. Okay, the Netziv says something very interesting. The Netziv also in this Vira'isa Oso, and you will see it, Vira'isa Osa, Vira'isa Osa, says the Netziv, Hu miyutar. This seems to be, because we have two Vira'isas. What does the Pasuk say? The Pasuk says, go up to the top of the mountain. Where am I? Vayamar Hashem Moshe. Nope. That's Kaklahu Yeshua. I'm sorry. At the top of the page, right? Go up. V'ra'isa oso v'ne'esafta alamecha gamata kasher ne'esaf Aaron achicha. But what does it say right at the end of the previous pasuk? Ure'ei es haaretz. It says Ure'ei es haaretz. Right. So what do you see? So you have this idea here, right? Ure'ei es haaretz, that you see the land, and you right. So says the Netziv, why is it necessary to say Vira'isa Osa and see it? You just told me you're ASR, so I'm going to see the land. So listen to what the Netziv says. He says Hu miyutar, it's extra. Ella eina shayach litzivui ki'im lahavtacha. He says it's not a command. This Vira'isa is not a command because that was already said. But what is it? A havtacha. What's a havtacha? It's a promise. This is a promise. It's an assurance. She'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mavticho, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises Moshe sheyireh, that he will see Osa. He will see Osa bishleimus b'mashma. What does the Netziv say? He'll see Osa. He'll see the land, but he's going to see it bishleimus. He's going to see it in its completeness, in its entirety, right? So we have to try to understand, what does this mean? He's going to see it in its entirety. He's going to see it in its completeness. After all, he goes up to see it. Who's living there? The Jews are not living there. He goes up and he looks in the land. What does he see? He sees the Shiva Amamim. He sees the 7 nations that are living there. He sees a land that's consumed with idolatry and immorality. That's what is that Bishlemus? What is it talking about, Bishlemus? So we have to try to understand what that Bishlemus is, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. And it's a great connection to Yom HaAtzmaut. I love it when what we're learning connects somehow to what's going on. It's a beautiful connection to Yom HaAtzmaut. We'll see it in a minute. But the Netziv continues, and the Netziv says, "V'hinei ein kan makom ahavtacha." This is not the place for the promise. Ki'im reish parshas ve'eschanan. Right? Where is the place for the promise? In Eschanan. What happens in Eschanan? Moshe pleads and Moshe pleads and Moshe pleads and Moshe pleads, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no, 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 no. Right? It's like a conversation with your young children, right? No, 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 no. Right? And except the difference between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that often they win. Right here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, that's it. No is no. You're not winning. You're not going to see the land. Right? You're not going to go into the land. And that's where the promise belongs, says the Netziv. Aval mishum shelo yehe b'mashma alei miyad achar hadibor uve'emes ain't okay. In other words, Moshe's not being told to go up right now. This is ela ad shenitztavesh shenis b'parshas ha'azinu achar kriyas hashira. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu will be told a second time to go up to the mountain, and that's when he actually goes up. He doesn't go up now, although we did learn an opinion, we did see an opinion of Machlokes between Ramban and Abarbanel as to whether he goes up now or not. But according to most Mefarshim, he doesn't go up now. This is the initial command, and then he will be told a second time to go up to the mountain, and that will be in Parshas Ve'eschanan, where we'll see he's told this again, to go up to the top of the mountain. Hold on. V'lamad Moshe zeh, Mida'amar lo Hashem haftacha zokan mevuar she'ena mitzvah ela kishiyagia sha'as ratzon shel haftacha zo. In other words, when is this going up appropriate? It's only appropriate when the promise is appropriate. And when is the promise appropriate? The promise is appropriate only right before Moshe Rabbeinu's death. That's when the promise is appropriate. Why is it appropriate only then? So listen to this beautiful insight. Actually, an insight by Rav Moshe Sternbach. He says as follows. Rav Moshe Sternbach says, why is this Re'iyah doubled? Why does it say in the last pasuk Ure'eyes haaretz, and here it says Vira'isa osa? Right, why is it doubled? So listen to what Moshe Sternbach says. He explains and he says, V'yesh lefaresh ki nis'ala Moshe b'samuch lepetiraso ad shezacha lir'os be'einav ma'aloseha v'ha'elyonos shel ha'aretz ha'mikudeshes. That Moshe Rabbeinu, before he dies, will be on such a level that he will see the land in a way that no one else has been able to ever see the land. He will see the land with all of its glory, with all of its splendor, with all of its spirituality. Moshe Rabbeinu will reach that point. When will he reach that point? He'll reach that point only at his death. There are two kinds of re'iyah in the world, right? Two kinds of ways to look at things. One way of looking at things is climb up to the top of the mountain, put the binoculars on and look out and tell me what you see. And you're looking at cities, and you're looking at valleys, and you're looking at mountains, and you're looking at fields, and you're looking at things. But there's another re'iyah, says Rav Moshe Sternbach, another level of re'iyah. And what is that? That's the re'iyah of looking beyond the physical. And Moshe Rabbeinu is going, before he dies, to be able to see the land with all of its spirituality, with all of its kedusha. He's going to see all of that. Now, if he would go up right now, he wouldn't see it. But when he goes up before he dies, Hashem promises him, says the Netziv, it's a Haftacha, Hashem promises him that he will see the land with all of its sanctity, all of its Kedusha. And that is this double Re'iyah which is here. Why will he see it with all of its sanctity? Because Moshe Rabbeinu is on such a level that Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the only one who's able to communicate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu face to face, if you will. Moshe Rabbeinu is on such a level that last level before he dies, or that last level, which in effect brings about his death, reaching that last level is what brings about Moshe Rabbeinu's death. At that moment, he is going to be completely spiritual. He's going to lose the physical. He's going to be completely spiritual. And when he is completely spiritual, and when he looks out on the land as a completely spiritual entity, he is going to see all of the spirituality of the land. And that's the promise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him. Obviously not for now, but for when the time comes for him to die. Tina, you got a question?
Could this be alluding to Acharit HaYamim?
Could this be alluding to the end of days when we will see things differently? I don't know, maybe, I don't know, maybe, could be. The end of days, we'll see things differently. The world is going to be a different place at the end of days. We should, it's not going to be easy to get there, as we can pretty much imagine. But the world will be a different place at the end of days. Things will be different. Will we see them differently? I'm not sure. I think the promise at the end of days is that things will be different. Nature will change. Although according to the Rambam, nature won't really change. But then according to most, nature is going to change, right? This lion and the lamb living together, davening in the same shul, not killing each other. So I think that's a change in Teva. That's a change in nature. It's not that they're still going to be fighting. We're going to look at them and say, oh, they're so nice, But I think it's going to be a change in nature. I have to tell you, I sometimes see it. When I look at my grandchildren. You look physically at the child and you see certain physical things, and then the child does something, right? Child does something, and it's just like you're looking and you're just saying, I just saw my son or my daughter, right? I'm looking at a 5-year-old, but I just saw them do something. Chedva, they're going to be done in a second. It's Yom HaAtzmaut. It's almost impossible to control today. All right? Right? That they're, although I share your frustration, right? You're a teacher, I know, right? But you see something and you see something beyond the physical. So maybe that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving us a taste. I'm sure each one of you has experienced that in some way or another, right? Maybe it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving us a taste of what this ultimate ability to see is. But that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is being promised, that he will be able to see the land in a way that no one has ever seen that land before. So it's a fascinating, consolation, if you will, to Moshe Rabbeinu as to what's going to be. Okay.
Is he going to see the Beit HaMikdash and all that?
We don't know what it means that he's, Rav Sternbach is not giving us the specifics of what is he going to see the Beis HaMikdash? I don't know. Is he going to see Yom HaAtzmaut? Is he going to see the flag? I don't know. He's going to see the spirituality of the land. And that's what's so special about Eretz Yisrael, is that there's a spirituality, there's a Kedusha in the land. It's hard to relate to. It's hard to relate to because when you go to, when you visit Israel, okay, so it's a trip, it's a vacation, things are different. But when you live in Israel, when you hear from people, especially Yom HaAtzmaut, right, this transition from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut, and when you talk to people who live in Israel and who experience this transition, who experience the land, you hear the Kedusha seeping out of their voices, right? That there is Kedusha to this land. The fact that we separate, out from the produce of the land, Trumos and Masros, it's not for naught. There's a sanctity in this land that is transferred into the vegetables and the fruit that grows in this land. There's a Kedusha here. And, it's sometimes very hard for us to conceive of Kedusha because we live in I think we sometimes live in a fairly tainted world, right? Where, where Kedusha is a little bit difficult to wrap our arms around. This week's Parshas Kedoshim, right? It's a little bit hard to do. It's a little bit hard to see Kedusha. Sometimes we get glimpses of it. There are moments in our lives where we see that Kedusha. Maybe we see that Kedusha in other people. Maybe we even see that Kedusha in ourselves. Maybe we see that Kedusha in davening. There are times when we see it, but it often eludes us. But living in Eretz Yisrael, it's every step you take. Every step you take is Kedusha. It's a whole different thing. And Moshe Rabbeinu is going to, in some way, experience that. He's going to at least understand that. He's going to be able to see that. That's the promise, says the Netziv, and that's how Moshe Sternbach understands the fulfillment of this particular promise. But Moshe Rabbeinu is being told that he's going to die. And as I showed you last week how Rashi often brings and synthesizes comments from the different midrashim, so you have a similar kind of idea this week as well. On the phrase "V'ne'asafta el amecha gam ata ka'asher ne'asaf Aaron achicha," says the Sifri. The Sifri, remember we learned, was a medrash on Chumash Bamidbar. Says the Sifri, Magid shenisaveh Moshe lemisaso shel Aharon. What does this teach us? It teaches us that Moshe wanted to die the same way that Aharon died. Remember, Moshe was there when Aharon died. Right? Moshe saw the death of Aharon. Moshe and Elazar, they saw the death of Aaron. So Moshe knew how Aharon died. And Moshe said, I want to die that same way. That's the request that Moshe has of Hashem. Excuse me. That's allergies, right? I feel like you have to. I feel like you have to give a disclaimer. You sneeze, you have to give a disclaimer. Terrible, right? Right, terrible. All right, right. So you have So you have this idea. You have this idea that Moshe desired to die in the same way that Aharon died. It's almost like he's saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Halavai, can you please arrange for me to die the same way that Aharon died? So
You taught us that Rashi a few years ago, where step by step, the Rashi that he went to the Mitah and he went to lie down and he got dressed, and each one was something that Moshe wanted for himself.
Right,
peaceful
correct.
Transition.
Right, and this is the same idea. Moshe is asking that his transition from this world, that's his request of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't see the request here. Rashi didn't mention the request. We don't see the request here. But, nevertheless, what do we see? According to the Sifri, that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is granting Moshe. V'ne'esafta el amecha gam ata ka'asher ne'esaf Aharon achicha. That's the Sifri's opinion. Listen to the Medrash Tanchuma. What does the Medrash Tanchuma say? V'ne'asafta v'ra'iso v'ne'asafta alamecha, says the Medrash Tanchuma, ein ata yafeh me'achicha. Here's a completely different interpretation, right? You're going to die gam ata, you also ka'asher ne'asaf Aaron achicha, as Aaron your brother died, meaning you're no better than your brother. Right? Aaron died as a result of the transgression at Mei Meriva, right? The transgression of hitting the rock as opposed to speaking to it. We spoke a little bit about what Aaron's role in that was, but you, Moshe, are no better than Aaron. Just like Aaron died as a result of that transgression, so you, Moshe, are going to die as a result of that transgression as well. Two different opinions in the Sifri as to what this comparison to Aharon was. Was it a comparison of the way in which Aaron died, that's the way I want to die? Or that's the way I'm going to die, that's the way you're going to die, Moshe? Or was it a comparison of the reason why Aharon died, that's the same reason that you're going to die? Two different opinions in the Medrash. Look at Rashi, and we see how Rashi synthesizes these two opinions. What does Rashi say? First, Kasher ne'esav Aaron achicha magid shenisaveh Moshe lemisaso shel Aharon. What does he do first? Rashi quotes the opinion of the Sifri. You can find the Rashi on the first column of Rashi. literally a third of the way down, right in the middle of the page, maybe a little bit more than a third of the way down, in bold, kasher nesav Aaron achicha. Bikan shenisavem Moshe, right from here we see that Moshe desired to die the same way Aaron died. Davar acher, another interpretation, says Rashi, eina ta tov mimenu. What? You're no different than him, you're no better than him. And you're going to also die for the same chet that he died for. And what is that? Rashi now tells us, al asher lo kidashtem, because you did not sanctify me. Right? Because you didn't sanctify me. Remember back to the incident. Had Moshe spoken to the rock and water would have come out of the rock, that would have been a greater Kiddush Hashem than water coming out of the rock after it was struck. Not that water coming out of a rock after it's struck is a kleinigkeit, right? That's also a pretty big deal, right? But that wasn't what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that wasn't the leadership that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted from Moshe at this particular point. And I heard one of my favorite rabbis to listen to is Rabbi J.J. Schachter. And Rabbi Schachter once spoke about how that HaKadosh Baruch Hu realized that Moshe's style of leadership was not the style of leadership that was necessary to take Bnei Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. And that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu realized that there needed to be a change, right? That the leadership has to be matim, it has to be appropriate for the generation which is being led and for the task at hand, right? And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged for this transition. Moshe would die and Yehoshua would take over. HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged for this transition. What?
In a way, we can assume that God also arranged for Moshe and Aaron to be upset so that this transition can happen with the change of leadership.
Correct. Of course, you would have to understand that, right? Nothing happens without a HaKadosh Baruch Hu's involvement, right? We have to understand that. Really?
Why would you remind the people of any transgression that
Oh,
Moshe did?
great
Because
question.
He is this
Right?
moment
Great question. Right? You know, Raylene is saying, do we have to keep harping on this? Like, is it necessary for us to keep mentioning Moshe as the reason why Moshe is dying again and again and again? Rashi talks exactly to your point. And what does Rashi say? Rashi explains, B'chol makom shekasav misasam kasav surchanam. Every place where the death of Moshe and Aaron is mentioned, the reason why they are dying is mentioned as well. Why, says Rashi, listen to this. Lefi shenigzera gizeral dor hamidbar lamus bamidbar ba'avon shelo ha'aminu. Because there was a gezerah, there was a decree against the generation of the desert to die. Why? Because they didn't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, you're going to be able to go into the land. You're going to be able to conquer it. Don't worry that the spies say that there are giants who are living there. I'm going to be with you. You're going to be going. And what did they say? Started crying. No, we can't do it. They didn't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore there was a gezerah of Misa on this generation that lived in the desert. And what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu not want? HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want, or should the pasuk, according to Rashi, it was actually Moshe. Lakach bikesh Moshe sheyikasev surchano. Moshe said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when I die, please tell them why I'm dying. Right? I'm not dying like everybody else is. I don't want people to think that I'm dying in the same, due to the same gezerah that affected the generation that lived in the desert. I don't want people to think that I'm dying because I didn't believe in you. Chas v'shalom. Kadosh Baruch Hu, when you write about my death, write the reason why I'm dying. Because I want people to know that that's the reason that I'm dying and not like the generation. Shelo yomru afhu min ha-mamrim haya. That people shouldn't say, even Moshe Rabbeinu was among the ones who complained. Mashal lishtei noshim shelokchos bebezdin. All right, that what happened? Two women were taken before Bezdin. Achas kilkala v'achas achala fage shvius. In other words, Afkan bechol makom shehizkir misasam hizkir sorchana. In other words, the Rashi is bringing a particular situation where, just because you go to court, not everybody goes to court for the same reason. Right? You can go to the court because you're a murderer, or you can go to the court because you're fighting a traffic ticket. Right? And even in the courts where all the, you could say they go to two different courts, but even in the courts, where the murderers go, there are people who aren't necessarily murderers who will go there as well. So the idea is that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted it known why he was going to die. That's the reason, Raylene, for why it always mentions Moshe Rabbeinu's, the reason for Moshe Rabbeinu's death. But here you see what happened. Here you see how Rashi took both the Sifri and the Tanchuma, both Midrashim, and incorporated them both in his commentaries. And Rashi said Davar Acher. Right? We've seen this often when we learn Rashi. What does Davar Acher mean? Another point of view, another way of looking at it. But there's a great principle when it comes to Rashi. Whenever Rashi says Davar Acher, so the first opinion he's giving is the opinion he prefers, but there's still something that the first opinion doesn't answer. And therefore he has to give this davar acher, he has to give a second opinion. In other words, neither opinion, when Rashi quotes both opinions, neither opinion fully solves all of Rashi's issues. And I remember Professor Nechama Leibovitz used to say, what's bothering Rashi? Right? Why did Rashi bring this davar acher? What was Rashi not happy about with the first answer that he had to bring the second answer? And you literally had to bang your head on the table to try to figure out, what was Rashi? Because Rashi's not telling you what his problem was. Right? What was Rashi's problem? Why did he bring the davar acher? So here you have clearly, the question as to why was there a comparison to Aharon? Right? What was this comparison all about? So this is so Rashi brings these two opinions, and we see that according to at least the Sifri, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to die with this Misa ben Neshika. There's an incredible Gemara in Maseches Shabbos that discusses the question as to whether or not people die without having transgressed. In other words, was death brought into this world as an institution and people are going to die regardless of whether or not they have transgressed? Or was death brought into this world as a punishment for people who have transgressed? But theoretically, if you don't transgress, you don't die. Right? So that's where it was brought into the world. So it's fascinating Gemara. The Gemara discusses, right? Gemara discusses the people who didn't transgress. And, did they die? They left this world. The Gemara goes into it's a fascinating discussion. I want to look at the Gemara with you for a second. But before we do that, I want to say that there's a little bit of a contradiction, a little bit contradictory midrashim about Moshe Rabbeinu. Here it seems relatively clear based on these midrashim, certainly the Medrash Tanchuma, that Moshe Rabbeinu sinned and he was deserving of death. And yet, when Moshe Rabbeinu dies on what day? The same day Moshe Rabbeinu was born. And Moshe Rabbeinu was born on Zayin Adar, and Moshe Rabbeinu dies on Zayin Adar. And Moshe Rabbeinu lived 120 years. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Bayom Hahu. The Meforshim understand what is Hahu, that particular day. Says the Medrash that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is particular, that everybody gets to fill their days. So wait a second, did Moshe die early? Did Moshe die prematurely? As this Rashi seems to imply. Right? This Rashi seems to imply if you hadn't not sanctified my name, what would have happened? It wouldn't have been your time to die. And then when Moshe Rabbeinu gets up and he's talking to the people, he seems to imply that what? That my life is complete. It's over. So one way of interpreting this is saying that there are contrasting midrashim. Midrashim don't always have to agree. Different opinions embodied within different midrashim, and this might be one example of that. But perhaps we'll get a little bit of a deeper insight as we move on here. So let me share a little bit about this Gemara with you. It's a machlokes between Rav Ami and the Chachamim. Amar Rav Ami says, Ein misa below chet. There is no death without transgression. Ve'ein yisurin, and there's no suffering below avon. Without doing something wrong. According to Rav Ami, Anybody who dies is dying because they transgressed. And anybody who's suffering is suffering because they did something wrong. That's what Rav Ami says. That's Rav Ami's position. Okay?
Holocaust, you can't say that 6 million people did wrong.
There's lots of, you're 100% right. 100% right. It's a very difficult, Rav Ami's position, if Rav Ami is to be the one we're going to paskin by, it's going to be very difficult, Chedva. Particularly your question. He was an Amora. He was one of the Chachamim of the Gemara.
So very early.
So in the early hundreds, right? I don't know, maybe between 200 and 500, somewhere in there. That's where he lived, right?
Before or after or during the first Beis Hamikdash?
No, this is all after the first. This is after the second Beis Hamikdash. After the second Beis Hamikdash, the Talmud comes after, right? The Mishnah and the Talmud, they all come after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed.
But he leaves no nuance.
Well, okay, let's just see. This is what Rav Ami's position is. We have to. Right, Rav Ami says, "I believe that there's no death in this world without chait, and there's no suffering in this world without having done something wrong."
Does that quantify?
What?
One sin, 2 sins, 5 sins?
He doesn't tell us specifically. Right, he doesn't tell us specifically, and let's give the Gemara a chance. Let's let the Gemara unfold a little bit, all right? Before. No, I understand. Let's let the Gemara unfold a little bit. Let's see. I realize it's one of those Gemaras. So now he explains, Ein misa below chet, right? There is no death without sin, dichsiv, because the pasuk says, hanefesh hachotaas hi samus, right? That it's the soul that sins. That soul is going to die. It's the sin that's causing that death. And that's what Rav Ami says. Meisvei, the Gemara brings a question against Rav Ami from the following: Amru malachei asharis lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right, the angel said before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shalom, mipnei ma kinasta misa al adam harishon. Why, God, did you decree death on Adam harishon? The Malachim asked God this. This is the Brisa, right? The Malachim asked God, why did you do this? Why did you decree death on Moshe Rabbeinu, on Adam harishon? And what does God answer? Amar lahem, God says to them, Mitzvah kala tzivisi v'avar Allah. Why did Adam die? Because I gave him an easy mitzvah to do. Don't eat from this tree. And what happened? He ate from the tree. That's why I decreed death in this world. Amar le. So the Malachei Asharei said, V'halo Moshe. Right? What about Moshe v'Aharon? Shekimu kol Torah kula umesa. Right? What happened? Moshe and Aaron, they kept the entire Torah, and yet nevertheless they died. Why did they die? The Malachim are asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Amar lahem, and what does God say to them? Mikra echad, right? That there's one decree, litzadik u'lerasha, that everybody is going to die, right? Whether they've transgressed or not transgressed, everybody's going to die. That's what the ultimate conclusion of the Gemara is precisely that there is death below chet, even though there are people who we say did not sin and did not die in the physical sense that we understand, and there is suffering without transgression, right? There is death in the world and there is suffering in the world, and that's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan. And even if you get 100 on the test, right? You've gotten 100 on every test in your life. Even if you get 100 on the test, that final test, you get 100 on the test, you're still going to die. Mm-hmm. That's what the Gemara is telling us. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. So why do people suffer if they didn't do anything wrong? The Gemara talks about something called Yisurin Shel Ahava. It's suffering that comes through God's love. It's hard for me to understand that, hard for me to even begin to explain it. Sometimes I have maybe a little glimpse, a little tiny glimpse, that sometimes the suffering that you go through refines you a little bit. Maybe it gives you additional kochos that you might not have had before, gives you additional abilities that you might not have had before. Just as an example, if you've ever been in the hospital, alone in the hospital, desperately looking for human contact, you have a different perspective on what Bikar Cholim is all about, right? If you've never been alone, if you've never been in the hospital, you've never been alone in the hospital, you've never been suffering in the hospital, you've never needed to talk to someone, you've never needed someone just to come in and say good morning, hello, right? So you don't really understand what that's all about. Yeah, there's a mitzvah of Bikar Cholim, I understand, I have to call somebody who's sick, I have to, cook a meal for them, true. But you have a whole different perspective if you've experienced things, which I think that's really the meaning of zeh, right? What is zakein? What's a person who's a zakein? Zeh shekana chachma, right? A person who's an elderly person is someone who's very wise. Why are they wise?
Because they know they're going to die.
Because they've been through a lot, because they've experienced a lot, because they've learned things from life's experiences that people who are much smarter book-wise from them don't know, right? Zeh shekana chachma. When we stand up for a grandparent who's walking down the aisle at a chuppah, right? We're standing up out of respect for all of those life experiences of that person, right? All the things that person went through, that's what we're standing up to recognize. That's what we're doing. Tammy, you have your hand up. Do you want to say something?
I do.
Go ahead.
That was really nice what you said. Suffering that comes through God's love. Do you remember exactly what you said? Or was it just on the fly?
No. It's called Yisurin Shel Aharon, suffering that comes from God's love. Luckily, it's recorded, so you can go back and listen to exactly what I said. Right? I have a hard time remembering what I had for breakfast. So I don't know. We'll see. But it's Yisurin Shel Aharon. It's suffering that comes about through God's love. Now, again, that's very hard, right? And it's almost, there's a danger of it becoming a Christian concept, right? Because there is among Christianity this sense of, right, suffering as God's love, right? I don't want to go there. That's not where the Gemara is taking us. But there is such an idea. Tina, go ahead.
Where does tshuva fit into his life?
Listen, so Moshe Rabbeinu, what does the Kadosh Baruch Hu say to Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshas Va'eschanan? He says, stop. Right? Stop pleading, stop davening, stop. Because I decree that you're not going in. Right? So regardless of, obviously Moshe Rabbeinu did tshuva. He was pleading with the Kadosh Baruch Hu 100 times, we say.
No, I'm talking about Rabbi Ami. He has this theory here. He doesn't leave room for tshuva.
Oh, listen, what happens if somebody, I don't know, let's go to secular society. What happens if somebody murders somebody and they do tshuva? Right? They're in court and they say, I'm sorry and I didn't really mean it, and or I did it and I didn't realize, whatever it is. Is the judge going to say, okay, you can go home? No, of course not. Of course not. Today sometimes, right? Today sometimes. But basically the idea is if you committed a transgression, there's a punishment for that transgression. And yes, you can, right? We have a concept of tshuva where you can wipe away the transgression. But even in our world, if a person kills someone, so Beis Din is going to execute that person. If everything, the witnesses are there and they were warned and everything else, Beis Din is going to execute that person, even if that person does tshuva. Tshuva is part of the process, right? Remember, tshuva is not just so I don't get punished. Tshuva is also so that my neshama gets cleansed. That's part of the tshuva process as well. Okay, we'll stop here for today. Im Yirtzeh Hashem, see you all next week. Have a Chag Atzmaut Sameach.